Let us get into the next configuration step, that is create standby server. What we are doing is we are creating a standby server onto the same dev server that we have. We are not creating any new virtual machine, and over here I have mentioned create a virtual machine for standby server with Oracle Linux installed. If you have bandwidth, you can definitely do it. In our case, we are just going with the same dev server. What you need to do is you need to install the Oracle binaries and do not create any database. Remember, we know that our primary and standby must be exactly same at file system level and everything. So even when you install the Oracle binaries, your Oracle home must be same as your primary database. So install the Oracle binaries into the same home location and just do not create any database, because your standby database will be created in some time. Next, set up networking between your production and the standby server. Again, we know that Oracle networking does not depend on physical DB presence. Whether the DB is present or not, that is separate case. Oracle networking is totally different. We can still configure a listener, we can still configure a TNS entry and make them work and ping each other. Let us set up the networking right now between our primary and standby server. Okay, on the left hand side we have the ProdDB, on the right hand side we have our dev server. We can also check the host name. Right. On the primary server, what I'll do is, first of all, let us check the listener, whether listener is up and running. lsnrctl status. We see that there is no listener is running on production server. Let us start the listener. Okay, listener is started and it is accepting incoming connections for prod DB. Great. We need to also configure the listener onto the dev server to accept the incoming connections for the standby server, right? So let us go to the networking location on production, network admin, and we'll cat the listener.aura file. We will copy the listener contents from the production into Notepad, and now we'll make the changes. Remember, this listener will run onto the standby server, and first thing is the host would be the standby server, nothing but 173. The port number, we are going with the default port number 1521. Fine. This is where the listener will run. Now the SIDs or the services for which listener will accept would be the SID name, remember, will be same, because we know that in standby configuration the connections will land for ProdDB only, but database is uniquely defined by a different name, right? And Oracle home location will also be exactly same, because both our primary and standby will have same Oracle home location. Let us copy this and create listener. We will go to the Oracle underscore home slash network admin location. This is our dev server. Let us open the listener.aura file. We definitely see some content over here because initially we have performed cloning and we have added the clone server details. What we can do is either we can add the SID list to the existing listener, or what we can do is we'll remove everything and we'll just add our new configuration, because just to not confuse you guys, I'll keep it simple. So listener, we have configured a listener. It is listening on to the current host. This is the IP address of our dev server, and the SID is ProdDB because SIDs will remain same in the entire DR configuration. Oracle home is same as our production server. Let us save it. Now cat the listener.aura file. Everything looks fine. Let us start the listener. lsnrctl start. Now we see that on the dev server, our listener is accepting connections for ProdDB. Now when your application connects onto your standby server, they get the same SID as ProdDB, and this SID lands onto the same database name as ProdDB because SIDs are same. So application is happy. This part is done. Let us exit from LSNRCTL. On production, now we must be able to ping from production to the standby server, right? And the connection should land onto this listener, and listener must be able to accept the connection. Let us first check the tnsnames.aura file. We'll open the tnsnames.aura file, and we have so many entries. We can remove the clone entries because right now we don't need any cloning entries. So I'm removing all the clone server entries. Great. Over here, the connection name that I'll use for my standby server would be proddb_stb. Remember, this is only the connection name. Everything else remain same. And I'll copy all the content from proddb. But there is a change. This connection should land onto 173, the IP address of my dev server, right? And the service name is proddb. Remember, if you don't change the host name, it will land onto the same host, that is 171 right now, and it will connect to your original production because the service name is same as proddb. So be careful. You must always make sure that correct host name is given. If it is not given, it will definitely connect back to your production server because service name is same in both the cases, right? And I'm not giving the same name as proddb. Why? Because we already have a connection name called as proddb. So if I give proddb and it is connecting to two different hosts, then Oracle TNS entries will confuse itself. That's why we need to give some unique name. And we know that we can give any name over here. It's just an alias to your connection string. So make sure correct host, correct service, and a different connection name. And you should not have the same connection name used in your TNS entries earlier. All fine. Save your TNS entries. Now cat the tnsnames.aura file. Because our listener on the dev server is running, we must be able to perform TNS ping right now to proddb_stb. TNS ping proddb_stb. We can see that our TNS ping is working fine, and once again review the connection. You can see that host is 173. You must always see the same IP address of your standby server. If you do not see it, you have to change it immediately. Otherwise, it will connect to proddb onto your same production server. Right. One way networking is done. We have to perform the other way networking, that we must be able to perform TNS ping from my standby server to my production server. Let us edit the tnsnames.aura file onto the standby server. We'll open the tnsnames.aura file, and we see that already proddb is added. Maybe while we were configuring or we were performing the cloning and all, we have already added the proddb. So we can use the same naming convention, but we just have to make sure that the host is correct. So on 171, our primary database is running, port is default, and the service name that it should connect is proddb. We'll use the same TNS entry. We don't need to add a new TNS entry to our TNS entry file. But in case if nothing is there, make sure you add this entry. We'll exit. Let us perform TNS ping from standby to primary. TNS ping prod db. We see that the host name over here is 171 and our TNS ping is working fine. Remember, this host name is very important in DataGuard configuration. Because of this host, entire configuration can collapse. You must have proper host, and always if you look at the service name, it will be same because SIDs are same. Right, Oracle networking is done. Next is we need to configure the redo transport, nothing but log shipping services. If this redo transport is not configured, DataGuard will not be able to ship the logs from primary database to the standby database. There are 4 parameters that we need to edit, and these 4 parameters will define the log shipping. And also there are some new parameters that you will learn. First of all, let us look at the log archive destination 1. First we'll check what is the current value in log archive destination 1. Now this is on to the primary server. Remember, these configurations we need to perform on the primary server. I'll just mention it over here on primary. So log archive dest 1 will connect to SQL plus /SysDBA, and this is our main production server. We can see ProdDB. Show parameter log archive dest 1. We see that currently log archive destination 1 is set to null value. What we are doing is we are saying and changing this value to a location onto the local server, stating that to use DB recovery file destination. That is the first thing. And also it is valid for all log files, whether it is any type of log file, it should be valid. And all roles, when we say all roles, whether our current database is primary or whether our current database is changed to standby or any type of role that my current database takes, always write all the log files into DB recovery file destination onto the local server. So log archive destination 1 will be the local destination of the production server. And we know that log archive destination 2 would be the destination of our standby server. So we'll talk about dest 2 in some time. Let us consider this command and we will look at this command once again. On production, before executing once again, alter system set log archive destination 1, we are giving location as DB recovery file destination, nothing but our flash recovery area. If you have a different location, you can give that location as well. Valid for all log files, whatever type of log file, whether it is online log file, offline log file, or redo log files, or any type of log file, it must be valid. And it must also be valid for all roles. Whatever roles my database might take in future, it must still be valid for it. And the DB unique name is ProdDB, because you have to specify uniquely each and every database in your data card configuration. This parameter will be used everywhere. Otherwise, your parameters will confuse each other, right? So that's the reason we are telling that, okay, for ProdDB, whenever the database unique name is ProdDB, you use the DB recovery file destination, whatever our flash recovery area is, and this should be valid for all the log files and whatever my database role is for ProdDB. Let us execute it and we'll once again check the log archive destination 1. And we see that our new parameter is implemented. Great. Nothing but we are telling that, okay, going forward, generate the archives into archive destination 1, that is DB recovery file destination, whenever the database unique name is ProdDB. Right. Next one, log archive destination 2. Right now this parameter is not at all set. We can check log archive destination 2. We can see that there is no value specified for log archive destination 2. But what should be our log archive destination 2? Nothing but our standby server archive destination. So we'll first copy this command and now we'll understand this command. Alter system set log archive destination 2. Remember, we can have 30 destinations, but right now we are using only 2 destinations. The second destination would be our standby server destination. The service with which this database should connect to your standby database, it is proddb underscore standby. This is the service with which it will connect to your standby database. Asynchronous means write in sync. Whenever there is an archive generated, you immediately write it onto the second archive destination. Valid for all the online redo log files and whenever the current database is in primary role. And DB unique name is, now it is changed to proddb underscore standby, because whenever the DB unique name is proddb underscore standby, it must use proddb underscore standby service to connect to this database and write the archive logs into the archive destination of our standby server. Let us execute this command. The next new parameter that you will learn is file server. This is very important, and in every interview people will ask you what is the meaning of file. So file is fetch archive log. In simple terms, you are telling that, okay, what is my fetch archive log server? When the current server is changed to standby role. Now we are implementing this parameter on primary, and when my primary server is converted to standby, it must fetch the archive logs from standby server, nothing but the unique name of the database from where it must fetch the archive logs. Let us understand this parameter more in detail. I will consider multiple data guard setup. This is our proddb and this is my prod stb1, this is prod stb2, and this is prod stb3. Right. Now current state is, this is primary and this is, all these are standby. Now when I change the roles, when I convert from primary to standby, and let's take, I want to convert or activate the proddb underscore stb2 database. That means this was in standby mode, I converted into primary mode. Then I have to tell that primary server, okay boss, I have 3 standby databases, from where should I get the archive log? That's the reason I must set file underscore server. Even if I have multiple standby configuration, you do one thing. That means I'm telling it to primary server, when you are converted to standby, you must fetch your archive log from proddb underscore stb, prod underscore stb2. Nothing but the unique name of the database, right? In our configuration, we have only one standby database. That's why we'll be using the unique name of only that standby database. Remember, this file server will be activated only when your database role is standby. Okay, let us look at the other way around. On primary, this is my primary and this is standby. On primary, the file server is DB unique name of my standby. Then on my standby, what would be my file server? Nothing but the DB unique name of my production, and production DB unique name is prod DB. So the file server for primary would be prod DB underscore STB. This is the unique name of my standby database. That is what we are doing right now. We are telling our primary database, okay boss, if you are converted to a standby server in future while we are performing failover or switchover, you must get your archive log from this server. This is the unique name that you have to specify. So let us alter this command. Alter system set file server equal to proddb underscore stb. Perfect. Now everything is fine. You can verify the file server, show parameter file underscore server. It is set to proddb underscore stb. Great. And the final parameter to configure the data guard, remember this parameter defines or binds multiple databases into a data guard configuration. This is also an interview question where interviewer will ask you that, okay, what is the parameter that will bind two databases into a data guard configuration? I can configure multiple data guards, but there must be something who will tell that, okay boss, this is your standby, this is your primary, these many are your standby, these many are your primary and all. That parameter is log archive config. In this parameter, you have to specify data guard configuration equal to, you have to comma separate all your primary and standby databases with their unique name. In our case, we have a ProdDB and we have ProdDB underscore standby as our unique name for our standby database. And that's why we specify log archive configure equal to data guard config equal to these parameters. This is how you have to specify. And let's take tomorrow you add one more standby. You add by separating it with comma like ProdDB underscore STB1 or whatever your unique name is. So right now I'll remove it and we'll execute this command. All this we are executing on production server. Show parameter log archive config, and it says that your data guard configuration is between your ProdDB and ProdDB underscore standby. So one more interview question comes over here. If somebody asks you like, okay, from where can you check whether a data guard is configured from a primary for a primary or production server or not? Then you can say that I can check log archive config parameter. It will tell me whether a data guard is configured or not. This parameter is enough to tell whether a data guard is configured or not. Now configured or not is different, and whether it is working or not, that is separate. Only whether data guard is configured, you can check it via this one, and if it is working or not, then you will have to literally check the sync of your data guard. We have to configure few things for our standby server, and before configuring all these things, why are we configuring these parameters and what is my approach to create my standby database? Let us look at our approach first and then we'll come back to configuring the standby server. Okay, now before creating the standby server, we have to understand a concept where a production server is running for quite a long time. Okay, this is like the start of the server and this is the current stage of the server, and it will continue in future also. On this timeline from start till the current time, client never wanted a data guard or a standby server. But today client says that boss, please configure a standby server for our production server. This is ProdDB. Now there are two approaches to create a standby server. What you can do is you can create a blank database, nothing but your ProdDB, using DBC or whatever you want, and then you apply all the archive logs that are generated onto the ProdDB till the current time. This you can do, and then you continue to apply the logs onto your standby. But it is always a headache to get all the archive logs and create a copy of your ProdDB. What you do is, rather than all this, you can take the backup from your production, the latest backup, restore it onto your standby server, and then you keep on applying all the logs and your standby will continue. This is what you can do. But with rman in 11g, we know that there are new commands, that is rman duplicate. I can directly duplicate my production server live running directly to a standby, and once I have the clone server, I can definitely start the log apply. We will be performing this configuration that will be using rman duplicate to copy our production server to our standby server. But as we know that before even we can use rman duplicate, we need to have parameter file, nothing but p file. Why do we need to have p file? Because we need to start the instance on the standby server. And once the instance is started, we can definitely use rm duplicate to clone our prod_db to standby. And once it is cloned, later on all the logs will continue to apply. Fine, this looks good. Now to create this parameter file, in a data guard configuration, the parameter file on your prod and parameter file on your standby will contain some special parameters. Till now what we have done is we have completed all the special parameters that are needed on the prod server in a data guard configuration. What we need to do is we need to create a p file for my standby database and then add those special parameters to the p file of my standby server. And later on we'll use rm duplicate to perform the clone, and then we'll start the data guard. We now have to configure the standby server. First what we'll do is on the production server we'll create p file from the sp file. Let us do it. Create p file from sp file, it is created, and copy it to the standby server. Also copy password file from prod to standby. Let us exit. We'll go to the dbs location /dbs ls-lrt. Now we'll copy scp init prod_db.aura and our aura pw file both to 192.168.0.173. Sorry, we have to mention oracle at the rate, and we'll copy it to the same location, oracle home dbs. Enter. We'll have to give the oracle password. Both the files are copied. We are done with the first step. So we have created the parameter file. Now you will have a question, why didn't we change the SID or no changes in the SID? Because SIDs on both the servers will be exactly same. That's why we just created the P file and moved it to standby server. Now on the standby server, you need to edit the parameter file and make these changes. Now what are these changes? Let us first open the parameter file onto the standby server. So just make sure this is our standby server, or what I'll do is I will change the text. We'll change the colors and okay, this is like looking like our notepad, and this will differentiate that okay, this is our standby server and this black window is our production server. Let us go to oracle_home/dbs location ls-lrt. We see that new parameter file and password file both are available. Open the parameter file init prod_db.aura. Now what are the changes that we need to do? Let us look at it. The first change is in log archive destination 1, change db unique name to the standby SID. In this case it will be prod_db_standby. Let us go to the log archive destination 1. This is the parameter log archive destination 1. Location is use db recovery file destination. Remember, log archive destination 1 would be for local server. So the db unique name can't be your prod_db. It has to be a local server, right? So local server would be _stb. This is my local server. Now on log archive destination 2, it is my main primary server. So the db unique name for my primary server is prod_db. I just need to make this change, and also the service name with which it connects to my prod_db is not prod_db_stb. It is prod_db only. So both log archive destination 1 should be for local server, nothing but my prod_db_stb, and log archive destination 2 should be my original main primary server, and we will use the service name prod_db to connect to primary server, and the primary server DB unique name is ProdDB. These are the first two changes. We have made change to log archive dest1, log archive dest2 is also changed. Now we have to change the file server for primary SID. So where is our file server? Now in this case, when my standby server is in standby role, the file server would be ProdDB. The archives should be fetched from production DB. So the SID would be ProdDB. We have to give a DB unique name to our standby database, and the DB unique name that we are using, it is ProdDB_STB. Without this DB unique name, you will not be able to identify which is your original primary or which is your original standby. We see that DB unique name parameter. Where is that parameter? Okay, that parameter will not be available by default, and what you can do is you can add that parameter manually. So DB_unique_name is equal to ProdDB_STB. Just to make sure, can you see DB name is equal to ProdDB, and when you check on production also, the DB name will be ProdDB. You will differentiate databases uniquely in a data guard configuration with DB unique name parameter. Great. Next, we need to create the respective file locations and directories because they will not exist onto your new standby server. Let us do that. First of all, we'll save it. Now we'll cat init proddb.aura and we'll create the directories. So we'll start with audit file destination. We'll create the control file location 1. We'll create the control file location 2. We'll create the DB recovery file destination, and we don't see any other location. So all the locations are created. Next, review all the parameters and networking between primary and standby. You need to review all the parameters once again because we have added so many parameters. We have played around with multiple parameters. On primary, once again check log archive dest1. This is our primary. SQL plus /SSDBA. Show parameter. We see that location log archive dest1 is set to DB recovery file destination, valid for all log files, all roles, and DB unique name is ProdDB because log archive dest1 will write onto local server. Next, log archive dest2, show parameter log archive dest2. Now it is set to write onto my standby server, and it will use the service name called as ProdDB_standby. It is valid for online log files, primary role. DB unique name is also ProdDB_STB. Great. Parameter looks fine. We have to check the file server. Show parameter. File server is set to my standby database. And log archive config. Show parameter. This is very important parameter, and this parameter defines or binds two database into data guard configuration. And we have to check these new parameters onto my standby database. Let us connect to the standby. Yeah, we already have the parameter file over here. So we will just cross verify everything is fine or not. Log archive dest1. Our log archive destination 1 is set to DB recovery file destination, and DB unique name should be our local database unique name, that is ProdDB_standby. Log archive destination 2, this should be my ProdDB because when I'll change the roles of the database, when my standby becomes primary and my primary becomes standby, the log archive destination 2 should write archives from my new primary to new standby. That's why we have to give this service name as ProdDB, and DB unique name will also be ProdDB. Great. Next, file server will definitely be our ProdDB. because that is where it will get all the archive logs. DB unique name should be prodb_stb. In our case, we have created all the respective locations and we have also reviewed all the parameters.